The journey to Grandma and Grandpa Marvin's in Sebastopol was more than fun, it most often was an adventure in itself, partly because of the boat trip across the bay on the Richmond-San Rafael ferry. Mike's dad, deciding on a late overnight visit to Grandpa and Grandma's, the family settling back in the 37 DeSoto, the trip beginning. The ferry boat ride across San Francisco Bay fulfilled the Wilsons continuing up Highway 101, the elder Wilson halting their progression at Novato as was the norm. The boy's dad stopping to buy a bottle of beer. The DeSoto turning onto Highway 116 towards Sabastopol when Mike first noticed the visibility was beginning to subside. At first just patchy fog, but the closer they got to Sebastopol, the heavier the fog became. As they approached the town, the car slowed. The normally bright lit streets now dimmed, shrouded in a dense fog. The fog density having increased to a point from the car, the darkened stores on either side of the street were no longer distinguishable. Mike's dad telling the family that everything was fine as he could still see the railroad tracks that ran down the center of the road through town. All was well following the tracks until a sudden lurching, the car coming to a stop. His dad having followed the tracks to where they left the road, realizing the situation, having to back the car back onto the pavement. Once on the road, progressing very slowly, the atmospheric malaise beginning to thin, the fog event, another adventure fulfilled. There is always something for a 10-year-old to do when visiting Grandma and Grandpa at their rural country house on Molina Road, 3 miles north of downtown Sebastopol. The house was well off the road, down a long drive with a wooden gate on the barbed wire fenced-in expanse. The rural property encompassing several acres of land, Mike hearing the adults talking about the 2 acres of grapes that grandfather harvested on the land located on the backside of the house. It never failed to amaze Mike that every time they came for a visit, Grandma was canning fruits or vegetables. On occasion, he and his sisters would volunteer to pick strawberries from the long rows in their giant vegetable garden situated in front of the house. The actual residence was a small 2-bedroom home. Family and visitors were always welcome, and if there was not enough sleeping room inside, there was always the outside, either in the tent-like hut beside the house, or under the stars in World War II. Folding cots, that for some reason were always in abundance, and set up in a row beneath the long clothesline. Mike was never concerned about the sleeping arrangements. If not outside on a cot, he would lay claim to the couch. It was known to all there was an ongoing problems with the small sleeping hut, as it was also used to store seeds, grains, and gardening supplies. It seems the raccoons made a bonanza discovery with its contents, deciding to take possession, and the start of an ongoing battle to keep them out. On one occasion, Mike's parents were spending the night in the hut hearing a visitor. His dad, being awakened by the noise, wasn't too concerned, thinking it was a raccoon. Reaching for a flashlight, assured that the light would scare the uninvited guest away. Shining the flashlight on the visitor, its eyes staring back, and then the pungent aroma giving notice, it wasn't a raccoon, but a skunk. The nocturnal visitor realizing he wasn't welcome, leaving the premises. The next morning his dad thankful the skunk didn't have an issue with the light. The dairy cows owned by a rancher across the way were pastured in a separate pasture, and fenced off from the milking herd was the home of a very mean-looking bull. A good portion of the bull's pasture was marshland, and growing in one well-dampened section were stalks of cattail. The 6-foot-high stalks packed solid for what seemed at least an acre. Mike and his sisters would venture into the cattail pasture, the 3 having a great time mashing down the cattail, making paths and hidden rooms, their own secret hideaway, but always being mindful that there might be a sudden appearance of a bull. It was only later that Mike gave thought to the destruction of the marshland cattail, his realization, a lesson learned. During a summer stay, Mike had made friends with a boy named Sonny Iverson who lived up the road on a nearby farm. The Iverson had an apple orchard and were also in the egg-producing business. The 10-year-old spending time helping on the farm, picking apples from a spike, storing them in a shoulder sack and placing them in the wooden crates. It was at this young age he learned, nothing on a farm goes to waste. Another chore was to pick up all the fallen and rotten apples, placing them in separate crates. Once accumulated, the crates containing the bad apples were then loaded on the truck. He accompanied the Iverson in the truck, watching as they dumped the apples into the receiving chute at the apple processing facility in town. Mike had to ask the inevitable question, what do they make with rotten apples? The answer came: apple cider vinegar. Another learning experience. The Iverson poultry endeavor included turkeys and a pair of guinea hens allowed to forage for themselves. The guinea hens were a useful addition to the farm, subsiding on ticks, lice, worms, ants, spiders, an array of insects and weed seeds. The hens were very aggressive and territorial, the Iverson farm belonging to them, their wandering freedom serving a purpose. Mike discovering that they were better than a watchdog, soon learning to be careful when around them, as they were very astute, standing their ground, not hesitating to initiate a charge, sounding a very loud vocal alarm. The family's interest, other than their apple crop, was laying hens, having dozens of stacked nesting coops, the eggs being plucked from the unsuspected twice a day. Mike inheriting a new chore, removing the gathered eggs from the collecting pails, placing them on the cleansing roller. The mechanical appliance, a machine that rotated the eggs on roller, passing them under a sprayer so the water could remove any residue that had accumulated on the shells. The eggs being removed and placed in large container cartons, stored for shipment. Grandma was a radio person, Mike and her shared this common interest. Maybe that's one of the reasons he enjoyed being with her. She would listen to her soap operas during the day, and in the early evening would tune in many of the same programs that he enjoyed. She subscribed to the Book of the Month Club, the books mailed in sturdy folded cardboard boxes, Mike for some reason deciding they were special, Grandma presenting him with a large selection, their purpose unknown, but to be explored. He always admired the calendar hanging on the kitchen wall. Its picture was of a bear and her cubs going through a fisherman's campsite, foraging for food. He never remembered saying anything to anybody about his admiration, but that Christmas, Mike received a gift from Grandma. It was the calendar picture in a homemade frame. He decided, Grandmas must be a mind readers. Grandpa had two abilities that the young man had never witnessed in another person. The first was, he could take hold of an electric fence, lifting the hot wire so you could pass under and not get shocked. The second was clapping his hands, catching yellow jackets or hornets between them and never getting stung. The boy reasoned it was more a mental determination, rather than a physical attribute, but then again grandpas are special. Mike found, the effulgence of love that resided in his grandparents, was something he would never forget.